On today's podcast, we're talking about cultural dissonance, what it means, and what it looks like when the actions and behaviors of leaders, teams, or organizations do not align with the culture they say they are committed to creating. No cultures are perfect, but is yours committed to strengthening the areas where cultural dissonance is felt?
Welcome back to The Thermostat with Jason Barger. If you're currently on a commute, a walk, or just a micro break in your day, glad you're making time to step back, to think, and to reflect on the next steps on your journey. I've never been more convinced the best leaders and team cultures in the world are the ones that make time to step back, breathe in good oxygen, and calibrate their thermostat. I hope today's conversation leaves you feeling grounded and inspired. Now let's dive into today's topic to engage our minds and hearts in order to authentically lead and create compelling cultures wherever we are in the world.
Hey everybody, it's Jason and welcome back to the Thermostat Podcast. Wherever you are and however you are coming to the podcast today, welcome back. So glad you are here. We are in Season 7, over 160 plus something episodes by now. So many great episodes out there. If you are new to the podcast, welcome. So glad you're here. Hope you'll go back, check out the micropods, short little topics that hopefully add value to where you are in your life and work, and also great conversations with thought leaders and folks that have joined me along the way for some amazing conversations. I hope you'll go back and check that out. And if you're one of the OGs that have been with us from the very beginning of the start of this podcast, welcome back. So glad you're with us and so glad this continues to add value to your journey, your own life, and your own work. My commitment to all of us is that hopefully this is a place for you to step back, to think, to think about these kind of things related to how you show up, your own leadership, the culture you're trying to create with the people around you, and that it adds value to just your thinking around those in your life and your work. Before we dive into today's podcast, if you'll do me the quick favor, of course, and you'll rate the podcast 5 stars. I hate that I have to ask for that, but, that's what everybody keeps telling me you have to do, remind people, because that's the way the algorithms work. So if you'll rate it 5 stars, please, please, please. If you will leave a nice review in your own authentic words about different episodes, whatever you feel about the podcast, that always helps, and the algorithms, that helps amplify the messages. And of course, if you share it with people in your network, social media, or however it is that you share it across your team and organization, hey, here's a topic I think we should listen to and discuss together. Those are ways in which this content gets shared and amplified around the world, and that's obviously the goal, is to just impact as many people and to be it's all a free resource. Hopefully it connects with people. So thank you for everybody that does that. From the beginning of today's episode, I want to, rinse and repeat some of the terminology, at least to just bring our brains back to this, to make sure we're on the same page for today's episode. And I'll start by just reminding us that culture is dynamic, which means it's always changing. It's not static. It's always changing. It's always evolving. It's always growing and changing in new ways. It's not static. Culture is dynamic. And it's shaped moment by moment every day by the way we think, by the way we act, and by the way we interact. And so our thinking about how we show up to lead, if you heard the last episode where I talked about how we think about leadership impacts how we then act and interact. Culture shaping, this is why it's so important for teams and organizations and leaders to get clear on the temperature that they're trying to set. What is that culture they're trying to create? Because it starts with the way that we think about it. And then from the thinking, it goes to then, do we bring that thought into life with our actions? And then in every little interaction that we have with everybody across our culture, or clients or customers or people in our community and in our life, does it represent the culture, or the way we think about that culture that we're trying to create into the future? So every person within a cultural ecosystem helps to create the culture in, again, healthy or unhealthy ways. They all contribute to it by the way they think, act, and interact. And cultural dissonance, that term cultural dissonance, which we're going to talk about today, is when our actions and behaviors do not align with the culture that we say that we want. So, on today's podcast, we're talking about cultural dissonance, what it means and what it looks like when the actions and behaviors of leaders, teams, or organizations do not align with the culture they say they are committed to creating. No cultures are perfect, but is yours committed to strengthening the areas where cultural dissonance is felt? But before we dive into today's topic, let's pause, let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
If you haven't done so already, we hope you'll visit Amazon or Amplify or jasonvbarger.com to check out Breathing Oxygen, my new book that is all about breathing good oxygen into ourselves and mindsets that fuel ourselves and the teams and the organizations around us. Positive, healthy thinking is as essential to great leadership and building a winning culture as the air we breathe. Leading yourself and a team of people has never been more complicated than it is today. As a leader, every move you make is either breathing life into your organization or slowly killing it. The atmosphere can easily turn toxic with negativity, blame, and doubt poisoning the culture. Just like every being on the planet needs good air to breathe, every organization needs leadership that breathes life into its people to sustain the energy required to complete its mission. Breathing Oxygen focuses on 6 key leadership mindsets that breathe life into any team: clarity, inclusivity, mental agility, grit, rest, and ownership. Join us, read, and share Breathing Oxygen.
Available now from Amplify Books on Amazon and jasonvbarger.com.
So again, culture is dynamic, which means it's always changing. Again, it's not static. It's always evolving. It's always growing, and it's always changing. And it's shaped moment by moment every day by the way we think, act, and interact. And every single person in your family, contributes to the cultural ecosystem of your family. Every single person in your team, at work, contributes to the cultural ecosystem of your team at work, and certainly across an entire organization, entire company, an entire community. Everybody's thinking, acting, and interacting helps shape the cultural ecosystem and helps create the culture. Again, in healthy or unhealthy ways, everybody's individual ways in which they think, act, and interact impact that culture and shape the culture. So cultural dissonance, this term cultural dissonance, is when our actions and behaviors do not align with the culture that we say that we want. So let's start with this term dissonance. You've heard me, I've already defined culture, but let's talk about this terminology around dissonance, because if you're not familiar with that term, it's important to know where it comes from. Dissonance, let's understand this term. It comes from its musical terminology to describe the following definition. Dissonance in music is a lack of harmony among musical notes, a tension or clash resulting from the combination of two disharmonious or unsuitable elements. So a tension or clash resulting from the combination of two disharmonious or unsuitable elements. So it's a lack of harmony among musical notes. So this terminology, again, a musical term of dissonance, but when we talk about cultural dissonance within teams and organizations, cultural dissonance is when there is a tension or clash that's resulting from a lack of harmony between our actions, our behaviors, and the vision for the culture or that future that we are trying to create. We say we want one thing, but our actions do not back that up and do not align with that future that we say we want to create. So let me give some examples. The leader that demands and preaches being prepared. I was around one of these recently. The leader that demands, preaches, and talks about the demand for being prepared and doing the little things right and going the extra mile to prepare for the moment, to be at your best when the moment requires it. But then they talk about those things, but then they are the leader that is continuously late to their own meetings, appears unprepared or scattered in their behavior to lead the meeting, they preach one thing for others, but their individual actions don't back it up. And therefore, everybody in that cultural ecosystem can see there's cultural dissonance between what they say is important and what they actually do. Teams that talk about honoring transparency, integrity, and trust within their teammates, but then perpetuate a culture where people talk around the water coolers or behind people's backs. They gossip, without addressing it directly with the people they're talking about. To say you want transparency, integrity, and build trust is one thing, but in order to create that kind of culture, it has to be backed up with a willingness to then have courageous conversations, open dialogue, and treating people the way you want to be treated. And if you're then gossiping around the water cooler in the parking lots or offline or texting, behind people's backs and talking about, then that actually, there's cultural dissonance, because when people don't have open, transparent, honest conversations, people in the ecosystem start to feel that cultural dissonance. And the last examples I'll give is that when teams or organizations, and these are general examples, of course, but teams or organizations who talk about practicing innovation, seeking creative solutions, and not just doing things the way they've always done them, but then you watch the way that from that thinking, that their actions and interactions, they never seem to carve out time to enter into the creative process, to think and dream and vision for how they want to do things differently. And then whenever someone attempts something new, they seem to be punished for the failure. And so the dissonance, the cultural dissonance, is loud and creates a culture where people then feel like we say we want to push the envelope. We want to, move beyond the status quo. We want to innovate and find new ways of doing things. But then when somebody takes a risk, they actually get punished. And so it creates a culture where people don't innovate, but actually are incentivized to stay exactly how things are, just create and keep the same patterns we've always known. And lastly, a commonly felt dissonance within teams is when leaders talk about the culture of the organization being, about more than numbers and performance and results, but it's about how we get to those numbers and how we get to the performance and how we get to the results. And it's not just about the numbers. It's not just about the performance or the results. It's the culture of how we get there, but then continuously reward and promote people who are difficult to work with, who aren't team players, who are hurtful to people, but quote-unquote achieve good numbers or results. In those kind of examples across teams and organizations, the cultural dissonance, they can feel it and see it, and loudly. This dissonance does damage within the team. So, for clarity with all these examples, no leader and no team, no organization, none of us, myself included, none of us are perfect. So I certainly am not perfect, and hopefully I do a good job of sharing that often, probably too much. But the spirit of this, again, is no place is perfect. So, of course, there is going to be cultural dissonance that occurs from time to time. But all of us and every cultural ecosystem has moments where dissonance does occur. The thinking, acting, and interacting within healthy cultures is the ability to recognize when that dissonance creeps in and where it's occurring, and then being able to shift our actions and behaviors in order to mitigate the losses and align ourselves back toward the future that we're trying to create together. I often, as you know, and I've talked about this on different podcast episodes that you can go back and listen to in more depth, but I talk about the concept in culture shaping of what we allow lingers and what we teach triggers. What we allow, the behaviors, the habits, the actions, the policies, the protocols that we allow that are counter to what the culture is we say we want, when we allow those things to linger, they kind of fester and become part of the culture in an unhealthy way. And again, that happens everywhere. And yet the healthiest cultures and teams and leaders are the ones that start to recognize where is that dissonance, where are those behaviors or habits or procedures or policies that maybe we're allowing to linger that aren't the best of what we want. And so we then realize we need to teach something new in order to trigger a more positive chain reaction. So what we teach triggers. So that means what's the new behavior, the new habit, the new policy, the new way of thinking, acting, and interacting that's going to trigger a new and positive chain reaction in alignment for that culture that we say we want to create. And so it means that these kind of leaders and teams are asking the questions, what are we allowing to linger, and what new habit, behavior, action can we teach differently to trigger a new positive chain reaction? So, some questions to ponder for today's episode. Where is cultural dissonance appearing in your life or your culture? Again, none of us are perfect. So where is that cultural dissonance in your life or in your team or your organization, in your culture? Where is it? And what new thinking, acting, or interacting would help bring alignment to that dissonance that people might be feeling? And if you identify habits, behaviors, or practices that are kind of lingering, that are opposite of what the culture is that you want, what new ways could you help teach new actions, new habits, new behaviors to trigger a more positive chain reaction? So I hope today's episode got you thinking in new ways. If a deeper dive into any of these topics is interesting to you, please reach out to us at info@jasonvbarger.com, info@jasonvbarger.com, and let us know. We'll continue to design content to help meet you where you are. Lastly, I hope you'll go back and listen to a number of these past episodes. That's so much great stuff out there that will add value to your journey. I hope you'll go back and check it out. Cheers to everybody out there for the road ahead. And remember that the future of leadership is you, is me, is us. We need to get clear on the temperature we hope to set, and then be courageous and committed to breathing oxygen into the mindsets and actions that will sustain our path forward. Step back. Remember, be a thermostat. Breathe good oxygen.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast, and I hope the messages and questions stimulate positive change along your path. As always, if these messages resonate with you and add value to your life, I hope you'll help amplify them throughout the world. Please rate, comment, and share on whatever podcast or social media platform you're using, and share this podcast with the people in your life or work who should be part of these conversations. That way, this spirit does, in fact, spread. If these messages or developing leaders and culture would be helpful to you and your organization, please contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. And remember, we are all ambassadors for the culture we want to create in our life and work. We have to own the vision we want to be a part of. The future of leadership is you, is me, is us. Be a thermostat.